Chapter 11, The Miserable Life of Bernie LeBaron, Flowers and Bullets. For one tempting moment, I considered denying it. I mean, if she had given me an F and I told her that I had stolen it from somewhere, maybe she would let me do it over again and I could get a D instead. But I nodded. Every word? I nodded again. I knew I was a goner. She dropped my essay on my desk. This will never happen again, she said. I shrank down in my seat, afraid to look at the red stain on my essay. She pointed, and I looked. Something was wrong. Dumbstruck, I glanced up at her for confirmation, then back down again. A very large A+ had been scrawled over half of the page with a big red marker. Stand up, Bernie, she commanded. I rose to my feet, my head spinning. Class, she announced, I have just awarded the only A+ I've ever awarded in my 20 years of teaching English. No one moved. No one breathed. Everyone thought it must be a joke. I tried to sit down. To the front of the room, she ordered. What? My voice cracked and my head began to spin. A pit opened in the bottom of my stomach. You heard me, she said. Take your essay to the front of the room. It was one of those moments when I wished I could turn into a bug and just disappear into some crack somewhere. I considered making a break for the door, but I couldn't see a clear path past her long spider arms. I slumped to the front of the class, trying not to look at anyone, and knowing that my face was as red as a beet. Read it, she commanded. Let these miserable butchers of the English language hear what a real essay sounds like. Mrs. Grimm, I begged, please read it. The command made the windows rattle. I began to read. Turn up the volume, she interrupted me. Tatiana way in the back wants to hear you. I glanced up to find Tatiana watching me. She didn't have a look of disgust or jealousy on her face like the other kids. She seemed interested. No living soul had ever found me interesting. No living soul had ever wanted to hear anything I had to say. Well, I suddenly wanted to be interesting, so I read in a loud, clear voice. When I finished, no one spoke. Mrs. Grimm started applauding, and a scatter of applause rippled through the class. The rest of you scurvy swine, she said, who complained that Poe gave you nightmares, need to listen well. I want real analysis, not mindless, baseless criticism. She glowered at the entire class, as if daring them to contradict her. Then she turned to me. See me after class. Well, the other students didn't react well to being called miserable butchers and scurvy swine. All through the next 3 periods, I had to endure being called teacher's pet and Poe the puke. This just proves that 8th graders aren't very original. Still, the fates had decided to make this my day of destiny because Mr. Woolley paired me up with Tatiana for the lab experiment. She gave me a calculated look as if she were trying to decide if she should insist on a different partner, but she didn't say anything. The 3 times I had seen her outside of school, all I had done was prove that I was a chump. I didn't know how to talk to a girl who watched me get attacked by a spider's web and blindsided by a car door. I did what any self-respecting 13-year-old boy would do. I didn't say anything. Tatiana broke the silence. That was a really good essay, she said, when we poured some chemicals into the beaker. Thanks, I said, and my voice didn't even squeak. I never thought of it that way before, she said. I shrugged, trying to be cool. Well, I just thought of Marigold and Zinnia, and it just sort of came out, I said. Who? They're friends of mine. They grow flowers, and, well, Tatiana set the beaker down. I love flowers, she said. You do? Her smile was so intoxicating, I think I almost swooned. I'm doing my research project on flower pollinators, she said. I've been trying to get pictures of an owlet moth and a hummingbird. This was my chance. The fates had thrown me a lucky roll of the dice. Such things didn't happen that often for me. They never happened. Marigold with lots of hummingbirds in her yard, I said. I see them all the time. Really? I jumped in with both feet. Well, I said, I don't think they would mind if you wanted to come see them. That's how I ended up walking with Tatiana to Zinnia's house on Saturday morning. I knew I should have kept going after the murderer in the woods, but I had never felt this way before. To be strolling down the street next to Tatiana, to be in her presence and seen by everyone, left me giddy. I wouldn't have felt any bigger if I had been strolling down the sidewalk with the Queen of England herself. Zinnia invited us in and gave us a tour of the flower garden. As if I wasn't nervous enough, Zinnia had to go and make it worse. She gave me a big smile and a wink when Tatiana wasn't looking, which made me feel all hot inside. I'd never heard half the flower names Zinnia mentioned, and sure couldn't pronounce them. Tatiana understood everything. She had brought her camera and she snapped pictures with the excitement of a child turned loose in a candy store. Marigold wouldn't come talk to Tatiana, even when Zinnia asked her to come over. Instead, she kept a good distance from her and studied her with a drooling eye like a cat waiting to pounce. I could tell Tatiana was skittish around her. More skittish than I was. Maybe she was thinking of Poe, too. A week later, my essay on Edgar Allan Poe came out in the newspaper. Mrs. Grimm had asked my permission to send it to the paper after class. If only I'd been able to think straight, I wouldn't have said yes. I must have still been dazzled by the A+. I had to ride around town delivering my essay. I wish Mrs. Grimm had dropped the whole thing because that essay made my life miserable. All the teachers seemed to think that I'd suddenly grown a brain and could answer all of their questions, which only made me look stupid. Brock and his crowd took to pantomiming a hatchet attack or a noose around their necks. I guess they were thinking of Poe's other stories. Someone drew a picture of a cat with an axe in its head on the whiteboard. It was a good drawing, too, but Miss Riley erased it as soon as she saw it. My paper route tips went up that month, so I guess that at least was a good thing. Jed, the guy with the grenades at his mailbox, didn't leave the Ziploc bag for me that month like he usually did. I waited until the very last day because I really didn't want to find out what was at the end of his long driveway. I delayed until I couldn't put it off any longer. I had my bill to pay to the newspaper. As I rode up his lane, I kept waiting to hit some tripwire or run over a landmine and get blown to Kingdom Come. I made it to the door in one piece, sweating and nervous. He came when I rang the bell and asked me to come inside. I hesitated. Even I knew that it wasn't a good idea to go into a stranger's house since I was just a skinny 13-year-old who couldn't do 10 push-ups to save his life. I also knew that this guy might be dangerous. He did put hand grenades on his mailbox after all. I thought of all of that and I went in anyway. He handed me the Ziploc bag with the money in it. He had a big square jaw, prickly with whiskers. He was the kind of guy my sister Missy would have called hot. "I'm sorry if I scared you the other day," he said. His voice was deep, just like you would expect from a guy with whiskers and a cowboy hat. He must have seen how I pedaled like mad to get away from his house. I nodded, waiting for him to admit that he had murdered the squirrels and nailed them to the trees. My heart started thumping against my ribs like it wanted to jump out and flop on the ground. He must have heard it because he smiled. "I think it's cool that you take pictures of the animals," he said. "You just need to do it somewhere else for a while." I wanted to ask him why he killed the squirrels, but that didn't seem like the kind of conversation I wanted to have with a man the size of a bear in his own house. "Why do you pile all that stuff in your mailbox?" I asked instead. "I have my reasons." He didn't seem angry, just unwilling to talk about it. I couldn't figure him out. It was hard to believe that he was a killer, and yet that was exactly the thing he would do, wasn't it? He would pretend to be normal only to turn out to be some secret psycho waiting for his chance. I hadn't read Poe for nothing. "Okay, well, thanks." I backed toward the door. "Hang on," he said. I froze. Was he going to slam the door and lock me inside? Had I gone too far? He held out his hand with something in it. "That was a good essay," he said, as he dropped a large bullet casing into my trembling hand. My eyes went wide. He had read my essay. He knew I was onto him. I was now a marked man. Was this bullet casing like the pirate's black dot? Was I next on his list? "It's a souvenir from the war," Jed said. "War?" I choked. "The Gulf War. The first one." His eyes gazed past me. "Thanks," I said. I didn't know what else to say. a perfect stranger had given me a bullet casing.